Folks, we're here to start the Eversource public hearing for 2018-2022 Vegetation Management Plan. I'm Clayton Edwards, Rights-of-Way Coordinator with the Massachusetts Department of Agriculture. The public hearing will run from 11 to 12:30 today. If you haven't signed in, please come to the front and sign in. Jessica?
And I'm Jessica Burgess, Legal Counsel with Massachusetts Department of Agricultural Resources. As Clayton said, this is the public hearing portion. We will not be answering any questions or responding to any comments at this time. There is time scheduled immediately after this meeting to have that type of back and forth. We will answer questions, we will hear additional concerns, and we will do our best to provide information about the Rights of Way program and information that we're able to share. So this portion is the public comment period, which is required by regulation. I would also like to note that we have also extended the public comment period, so a new notice has been submitted and should be published in the Environmental Monitor, I believe, tomorrow, which indicates that the close of the public comment period will be March 30th at 5 p.m., specifically states March 30th, 5 p.m. as when all comments are due to the department as it relates to this Cape and Islands VMP. So you are.
Okay, my name is Stephen Seymour. I'm a registered civil engineer in Massachusetts. I did notice that during this last storm that it was a different provider of electricity, but they over on Nantucket they had 0 customers affected, and I do know that they have an opt-out policy over there that people with certain properties, you know, people on their properties can opt out of being sprayed and can take care of things themselves. And I wanted to point that out, that didn't seem to impact them at all with their customers being affected. And that would be a good way to go. A lot of people have a lot of different situations up and down the right-of-ways, and it'd be good if they could opt out. I did look at some of the materials more, and and how they're looked at through modeling and those kind of things. And to me, I think that's pretty theoretical stuff. As an engineer, I used a lot of theoretical stuff. So I was telling some of the staff, I didn't design it, but there was a space truss over a big basketball court thing in Hartford, Connecticut, years ago in my youth. They had a snowstorm, the thing collapsed in the middle of the night. Then it was the lawyers and the engineers and everybody else figuring out. Fortunately, nobody was in the building. There was a UConn game that night. The game was over, people were out. I don't know, I think we got somebody to thank for that. But anyway, it was just steel and stuff. The other thing I wanted to bring up at this point was there are relatively, in sandy soils, glyphosate and other ones of the pesticides that are on the list have fairly long half-lives. So like I was seeing 130 days for that, and then some of the other ones, there's a lot of ranges, like triclopyr was like 1 to 90, and then the breakdown product TCP, one that I am concerned about because it's it can affect the nervous system, was 30 to 90 day range. So we're talking long period of times, theoretically, again, that they could be out there. And I am concerned about that. I have talked to a number of people on the power lines over the years, and many of them tell me they don't get any notices at all as to when they're spraying. And then it seems it's not part of the protocol to put signs out to say, you know, this is being sprayed. And that, of course, does concern me because, you know, even if you do a lawn, you're supposed to put a sign out, or if you have even an island in the middle of the road, you're supposed to put a sign out. And that goes back to something I brought up briefly, that we kind of just trust the people to do their jobs that way. And when I was an engineer working for things, we didn't do that. We had inspectors all the time. And they were paid for by whoever was doing the work, either the one doing the work or the one like Eversource that wanted the work done. And that would tighten up some of this. That being said, I think, and I'm from a group called Green Cape on Cape Cod, and the people in Green Cape are unanimous in thinking this is a bad idea. That Cape part was, it was like really, it started as an alliance of pesticide education, and we got involved with the state, with the school systems, helped pass regulations that you couldn't spray in the schools when kids are there, kind of a no-brainer. But we had done a survey of the schools, and it was very slipshod. You know, people didn't know what to do. They just, like, the custodian went with raid, you know, when they were out playing or something. You know, it's really bizarre. And we did get involved with some other things on a statewide basis too, and that's why partly why we formed the group. I think, and I'm going to close with this, I think there's sort of like mindsets, you know, and I think when you're on Cape Cod for a while and you watch a lot of what happens, you get a certain mindset, which is very proactively prevention of having problems is what you know, where you end up. And then I think when you're in the business, I guess, or whatever, and in the business of regulating the business and used to that kind of thing, you get in the mindset that these things, that nothing's going to happen with these things. And or can get with that. And I know you've taken a lot of precautions from the point of view of what is done in a lot of instances. Obviously, the homeowner spraying something themselves is completely out of control, and you know. But that being said, I think, on behalf of Green Cape, that it is a very bad idea to be spraying here, and I think somebody else has brought in a better-looking map than the one I brought in, and it shows it with the lenses, and it shows the where the aquifer is, and it shows where the power lines is, and I'm just going to close with that. I think it really, and if I didn't come in today and say that, I couldn't look at myself in the mirror, to tell you the truth. I've seen a lot of accidents. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Sue Phelan, please. Just come on up and sign in.
Good morning. I'm Sue Phelan, also from Green Cape. I spoke at the sandwich hearing, but I also heard some research that I believe was being mischaracterized that was discussed at that hearing, so I'd like to set the record straight on that. We were talking about the results of drinking water studies done by Silent Spring Institute. And I believe the environmental chemist there said that there were no herbicides found in those tests. I know that MDAR and Eversource both have been contacted on several occasions to try to keep them from mischaracterizing the results of those studies. So I'm going to read directly from Silent Spring researcher. Results from Silent Spring Institute drinking water studies have been used by NSTAR, now Eversource, to reassure Cape residents that spraying herbicides in power line rights-of-way will not affect Cape Cod groundwater. We wish to clarify the scope of our drinking water research and explain why our results do not support the conclusion that herbicide spraying will not affect drinking water. Our studies of public and private drinking water wells were primarily focused on chemicals found in wastewater, mostly from septic systems. We did not design these studies to evaluate possible impacts of herbicide spraying in rights-of-way. In our 2010 study of 20 municipal drinking water wells on Cape Cod, we tested for 5 herbicides including just one, triclopyr, of the herbicides proposed for use in Eversource NSTAR's 2013 yearly operational plan. There haven't been further follow-ups. In our 2011 study of 20 Cape Cod private wells, we tested for 8 herbicides, including 4 of the proposed herbicides for rights-of-way. The samples we tested did not contain detectable levels of the herbicides we included in our studies. However, our results are of limited relevance to NSTAR's, now Eversource's, vegetation management plan for several reasons. First, we did not specifically select wells close to power lines, so the wells we tested were not necessarily those most likely to be affected. Second, we did not include all herbicides included in the 2013 plan, nor undisclosed inert ingredients in pesticide formulations that also raise health concerns. Third, our private well samples were collected almost a year after the beginning of NSTAR's voluntary moratorium on spraying, meaning that we would have been unlikely to detect herbicides from recent spraying near power plants. Okay, another concern is that people and pets passing through sprayed areas can come into direct contact with herbicides and contract them into their homes. In our household exposure research on Cape Cod, pesticides applied outdoors often were detected inside homes, where they can persist longer than they would outdoors. Pesticides continue to be among the chemicals in our ongoing groundwater and household exposure studies. Although most herbicide products have not been thoroughly tested for potential health effects, the active and inert ingredients raise multiple health concerns. And I guess I'll stop there, but I just wanted to be sure that anyone who was at the previous hearing understood that some of the things that were said there were actually very inaccurate, and we have the researchers, we have information directly from the researcher refuting that. Thank you very much. Oops.
Moss St. George, please.
Cell phone. My name is Moss St. George. I'm a power line abutter living in Centerville, Barnstable line. My parents have lived there for 25 years. My grandmother and grandfather came here in a horse and buggy in 1929. My grandmother had a restaurant in Barnstable for 30 years. She worked her butt off to buy land around here. She used to own land on Wequacket Lake, which she sold off slowly, and then at the end of her life, she made a little road up the hill so that her kids could have a place to live. I live there. My parents are deceased. I've been back and forth to PA for 7 years, back and forth, and I've been a witness to the Eversource spraying and clearing of lines. And now I'm the one who got the big kahuna. I got all the power lines in my backyard that came from the transmission station on Oak Street. So I'm the one who gets all the goods. In the last 5 years, I've been sprayed twice. All the land, all the trees were cut for 150 feet on both sides of those power lines for no reason at all. Now I get to look at Route 6. My property is probably worth half of what it was before any of this work was done. And if the power stays on Cape Cod, it's because of my land being affected, okay? Because now we have 36,000 kilovolts coming through, aiming right at my house. I don't want to live here and have to worry about chemicals going into my well, which is, my well's 50 feet from the center of the power lines, okay? And I'm sprayed constantly. I was sprayed twice in the last 5 years. And I go up there and I talk to these guys. I don't want to have to do this for the rest of my life. My plan on moving up here was to start a place where people could live, hang out, and watch birds. Since they started spraying, they didn't just cut the power lines. They bulldozed it twice in the last 3 years, okay? For what cost? We're paying for this. I watched them put the power lines up, so I know how they work at Eversource, and I don't want to go into that right now. I want to be a good neighbor. I want to live here. I want to have my livelihood here. I can't do what I wanted to do because there's no birds left, okay? When I moved here, my parents have been feeding the birds for 30 years. Beautiful birds everywhere. I have 1/10 of the birds. I have no butterflies, no milkweed. The bees are dying. They're dying right in my watering hole, okay? Because they can't get back to their nests because of these chemicals. I'm a long-term survivor of Lyme disease. I'm disabled. In the last year, I've grown a thing over my retina. They don't know why I grew that. I've had a persistent staph infection in a wound that I received, and I had to take high-dose antibiotics to get rid of that. I have to drink this water. There's very good evidence that's come out that the toxins in herbicides are causing the microbiome, which is your immune system, to be broken down. It's very good evidence. The power line companies aren't going to tell you that. Monsanto and the people who produce GMO crops that are sprayed by glyphosate all over the country are not going to tell you that. There's very good studies that have been done in Saskatchewan from 1970 onward that show a direct link between non-Hodgkin's lymphoma and the spraying of herbicides. Every day when you eat your Cheerios, your cornflakes, and other products, there's glyphosate in them. They say it's a very low amount. Now let me just give you a little rundown of some of the things that we used to think were good for you. Bloodletting, smoking, it was good for your lungs, exercise, thalidomide, Agent Orange, letting guys go in and recover after 2001 without masks and air supply. And now we got firefighting foam on Cape Cod that they're having to get out of the waterways, and we have plastic pipes that we're going to have to remediate to get our water service clean. Now, this is another thing, and in 20 years, you're going to find out everybody's getting these chronic diseases. What are they from? They're from the chemicals that we're putting in our environment. There's no safe water left. I don't want to buy Poland Spring water because it's probably more polluted than the water after a year that flows through my well. But I want to have a place that I can give. I suffer to keep a house so that my kid and my niece and my nephew can inherit something worthwhile. And we live here on Cape Cod so we can have birds, bees, possums, skunks, and other creatures that are alive, bears that wander across, and all that. We make our living off of tourism, which is dependent on the environment being clean. So I'm against the spraying. I know that we're going to find out down the road that these companies that produce these products are lying to us. The evidence is out there. It's already been shown at 2A, I think, carcinogen in California. And when stuff goes in California, you know the rest of the country is going with it. I have a friend whose grandfather died because he had a farm in Idaho where they sprayed glyphosate on the corn. They fed it to the pigs died, he died of cancer. This is going on all over the country. We don't need to do it here. Thank you.
If anybody who just walked in wants to sign up right here. Thank you.
Steve Kleinberg, please.
My name is Steve Kleinberg. I reside at 15 Clayton Road in Eastham. I am a commercial organic farmer in Brewster and a former member of the Eastham Conservation Commission. For the record, I oppose Eversource Energy's proposed 5-year vegetation management plan for areas beneath power lines. Herbicides will negatively affect the health of the region's fragile ecosystem if the chemicals remain in the soil and seep into the aquifer. While this may have been previously stated in the sandwich meeting and other meetings, in various articles that have been written and various discussions that have taken place officially and unofficially, on the record and off the record, bear with me please. As an organic farmer, I would certainly be against the use of glyphosate, the active ingredient in Roundup, which is even more toxic when mixed with other herbicides. Glyphosate, the active ingredient in Roundup herbicide, is a biocide that interferes with cellular metabolism and a toxin. It is one of the 5 herbicides Eversource uses on Cape Cod and Martha's Vineyard. Its toxicity is of concern around the world, and it has been banned in many jurisdictions, including the Netherlands, France, Belgium, Russia, Sri Lanka, Malta, Mexico, Argentina, and Colombia. The World Health Organization's International Agency for Research on Cancer, the IHRC, recognizes glyphosate as a cause of cancer, especially non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, in humans and in other lab animals. It is recognized as a probable cause of acute renal failure, which is an epidemic in a number of tropical latitude agricultural societies. The state of California, as was previously mentioned, lists glyphosate as a cancer-causing agent on labels of products. And I'd be happy to provide links to that information if you so desire. Thank you for the opportunity to speak, and thank you for listening.
Jim Hilda, please.
For anyone who just came in, if you want to speak, there's a sign-in sheet up here.
Good morning. My name is Jim Hild, and I live year-round in Brewster, Massachusetts. And I have, and I thank you for this time to speak about the use of herbicides on Cape Cod. I'm not a scientist or an expert in testifying about the use of herbicides. I have a private well as my source of drinking water. It taps into the aquifer on the Cape, which, as most of us know, is the only natural source of drinking water we have for Cape Cod. The last time my water was tested, it showed that my water had contained a multitude of chemicals, most of which I couldn't pronounce, okay, but that the test proved that they were within safe levels. However, this test did not check for many of the dangerous chemicals that we're talking about today. 2015, Patrick Moore, a lobbyist for Monsanto, was interviewed by a reporter about the use of glyphosate in controlling vegetation. He claimed that glyphosate was safe to drink. He told the reporter interviewing him, quote, "You can drink a whole quart of it and it won't hurt you." He insisted. When the journalist informed him that he had a cup of herbicide prepared for him to drink, he refused to drink it. And he said, "I'm not stupid." It is my understanding that under the current state law, federal laws, and regulations, Eversource has the legal right to use these chemicals in question today to control vegetation under the power lines. However, just because something is legal doesn't mean it's right. I'm thinking of Agent Orange as one good example. At some point, common sense must enter into the decision-making process of what we use in controlling as controlling agents for our vegetation that is acceptable to all the interests and health of those who are affected by it. Unfortunately, our water supply in this country is being polluted by more and more chemicals. I would like to know that the water that I get from my well is safe. To quote Patrick Moore, "I'm not stupid, and I don't think the people on Cape Cod are stupid either." Thank you.
Don Kieran, please.
Hello, my name is Don Kieran. I'm Assistant Director of the Association to Preserve Cape Cod. We are Cape Cod's regional nonprofit environmental advocacy and education organization. And we were established in 1968, so this is our 50th anniversary year. And for those 50 years, we've been fighting for the protection of the natural resources of Cape Cod and for the water resources of Cape Cod. And over the course of those 5 decades, we have for too many times been confronted with contamination of our water supply in various areas from various resources. We view the vegetation management plan that Eversource is proposing as problematic for a number of reasons, particularly before the use of herbicides. We've done, in preparation for this comment period, we've prepared some written comments that we are submitting, and in those comments we detail our specific concerns about the list of approved herbicides that are on the MDAR list that Eversource is proposing to use. We strongly believe that there are much better management practices to use on Cape Cod because of our unique situation, our unique soils, the fact that we have a sole source aquifer that's our only water supply, drinking water supply, that feeds our ponds, that feeds our streams, and goes into our estuaries around the Cape. We've been working with other organizations on the Cape and have seen them use alternate methods on land that they own that run through the right-of-way. Two examples that we point out in our written comments are Brewster Conservation Trust and Harwich Conservation Trust, which have done hand vegetation management on their properties that have been just as successful as the Eversource management plan that they propose to use, that they've used in the past using herbicides. So we think that because of our unique situation, that the Cape deserves a little bit better scrutiny as far as this proposal, and we urge MDAR and Eversource to work cooperatively with the towns on the Cape and with our regional leadership on the Cape to provide a much better alternative management plan that is suitable for Cape Cod and our unique situation. And I do have written comments. If you're willing to accept those today now, I could submit those now, otherwise I'll mail them in. Thank you.
We can take written comments today as well.
Thanks, sir. Charles Harris, please.
My name is Charles Harris. I live in Eastham. I've lived there for the last 8 years. I'm on the Water Management Committee, and I have some comments that I've given the committee to submit to MDAR. And the essence of it is that I have a degree in agriculture from UMass 56 years ago. And I remember when we took our soils course that we were taught that soils by the soil scientists are looked upon as containing sand, silt, and clay, those three components, and that would be the world over. All right. I know that the soils in Eastham are extremely porous. You can look into the soil survey for Barnstable County, and it'll indicate that the permeability is greater than 20 inches per hour. And I'm quoting what would be the Carver soils that are the predominant soils in Eastham. And those soils essentially make up 70% of the soils in the right-of-way going through town. The other small percentages is things like marshes that, you know, certainly are a different category. My focus on the lack of the silt and the clay components in Eastham soils has to do with my understanding that these small particles are the particles that actually hang on to contaminants that might otherwise be there in the soil. And I guess I would say that The soil survey indicates that it's 5 to 0% of the soil in Eastham is made up of clay. That's a very small component. We're talking about almost pure sand here. All right, now silt. Silt is little broken pieces of rock, and of all of the different minerals that make up the Earth's surface. Okay, well, if you look at the soil survey, it says that 5 to 10% of the soil in Eastham, the Carver soils, will pass through the smallest filter for what, or sieve, for what they do to kind of measure soils. So there's negligible silt there. Those are the two reasons I'm saying it. Okay, well, the next idea is that in the soil survey, it talks about capillary action, and I just want to read that. Water held as a film around soil particles and in the tiny spaces between particles. Surface tension is the adhesive force that holds the capillary water in the soil. So basically, when you spray on the top of the surface, if you don't have the little small particles with their little surfaces to catch basically almost molecule level water, then it's just free to keep on moving down through the soil to the groundwater. I mean, it would be nice if we had clay soils all around. And the other thing is that I'm wondering if the folks who have tested for the safety of these herbicides have done it in permeable soils like Cape Cod, or they did it more for a representative soil for the rest of the United States. I mean, if I think of Kansas, it's weathered limestone, it's heavily clay, it's minimal sand, it was not glaciated. There are places where the risk seems okay, but I'm saying it's not okay here. Thank you.
Laura Kelly, please.
Good morning. Thank you, MDAR, for allowing a hearing on behalf of the public to share their greatest points of views of why the vegetation management plan for 2018 to 2022 should not be allowed because it lists the use of herbicides. I'm Laura Kelly of North Eastham, president of POCCA Cape Cod. That's POCCA, capecod.org, a nonprofit created to educate about the hazards of what is legal and allowed by federal and state agencies today that are not so safe for us in the long run, and what we can do to lessen our own impact above the water we use every day. I realize you, as a state MDAR, are looking for scientific facts to base your changes in the VMP, the Vegetation Management Plan written by Eversource that MDAR is to approve. So I wanted to give you one here today about our hydrology here on Cape Cod. So referring to this map that was actually created by USGS and refers to Mass GIS for the, I call it underground, what's going on underneath our surface level, right? There's lenses, there are 6 lenses, 5 of them are drinkable. Provincetown lens is not drinkable. That's the Pilgrim lens, it's called. Provincetown gets their actual drinkable water through Truro, which Truro is on the list for vegetation management for the next 5 years by Eversource. So if you can look at these the pink line are the rights of ways. Along the rights of ways, the depths to drinkable water are less than 50 feet. In their VMP plan, they are, I want to say thank you, are protecting our wells. No spray is allowed by herbicides 50 feet within a drinkable private well, 100 feet for a public well. But along the rights of way power lines, you can see all through Truro into Eastham, down through Orleans, even in Brewster, it gets a little bit deeper to 40 feet. There is, I propose this as a question, is Eversource violating their own written regulations? They're not allowed to spray within 50 feet of a well, yet the lens is less than 50 feet deep. Water comes from lenses. So this is where I really want to see the VMP written for the ecology of Cape Cod. So we need to remember that gravity is vertical, not horizontal, right? And I want to say thank you for writing regulations that are 50 feet. If we could also have it 50 feet below us, then you can't spray on power lines, except in some places in Sandwich, where you can see the depth to drinkable water is just over 50 feet here, according to the Mass GIS map. I'll be glad to send you this map electronically. The other thing to think about that Charles touched base on is our sandy soils. Permeation through according to the Barnstable County Soil Survey Document Book of 1993, a liquid travels 22 inches an hour in our sandy soil here. This is a study by the U.S. Department of Agricultural Soil Conservation Service. So these are documents that are, it's in writing that these things are happening. So if it's 22 inches an hour and it's less than, it's more on average 20 feet, but it's less than 50 feet. I mean, we've got to put these equations together and realize what's going on our rights of ways. It was handed to me this summer by MDAR that in 2013, Eversource used 2,065 gallons of herbicides on rights of ways on Cape Cod. In 2014, Eversource used 2,103 gallons of herbicides on Cape Cod. They sprayed the last 5 years. That was the last VMP plan for 5 years. If they did around 2,000 gallons each year for the last 5 years, is that around 10,000 gallons that Eversource applied on Cape Cod? This is what we're trying to prevent from happening again. This is the next VMP for the next 5 years. We've got to do what we can when it's a situation that they can use something else. So Eversource did go through and do a mass clear cutting from 150 to 200 feet. And I thought, why are they doing this? Until this year where they put up the poles that are so tall. It makes sense now. But for years I was like, why does it have to go 200 feet? So they're not talking to the town's departments what's going on the power lines. They're just going forward and doing things, unbeknownst to abutters as well as town departments. So that is a request that I have, is to please connect with at least town departments. Let them know what you're going to do before you're going to do it, why you're doing it. Why did you need to go to 200 feet? Well, because in 3 years we are going to put poles up that are 200 feet tall. Okay, thank you. Let the town's departments know what's going on out here on the power lines. Eversource is the #1 largest user of herbicides on Cape sandy soil. Cumulatively, homeowners and businesses use more. We know this. So let this be a wake-up call for everyone who lives here and resides here to shift our ways. We're in this together. No one is exempt from the impact of our drinkable water here on Cape Cod. Each one of us does matter. So one last thing I wanted to bring up is that MDAR is asking for us to show them harm. That's why we're here. We need strong document stating why we as a person are harmed directly connected to Eversource's spraying, or why are our wells harmed or contaminated. These, to me, are impossible questions to be answered. Does that mean our state, MDAR, is waiting for us to be harmed before they're going to change the regulations? We're asking our boards of selectmen in the past 3 years. I've got 21 towns. That's thanks to the POCCA team efforts to go out and speak to the boards of selectmen to write documents against the vegetation management plan and the YOP, the yearly operational plans, from happening. 21 towns have written against this. They continue to allow this. We're in another situation where MDAR says, well, the selectmen, we want to hear from the boards of health now because they have more standing. Regardless, these are our boards. What are boards set up for? Boards are set up to protect their residents, right? So regardless of whatever board you want to hear from, and you're going to hear from water boards, and you're going to hear from health boards this time around, per your request. But my point is, it doesn't matter what board it is, the boards are set up to protect us. You know, so we really want the state to not look at the EPA standards anymore. The EPA allows herbicide use. It is legal. This is not good enough for the hydrology of Cape Cod. That's less than 50 feet to our drinkable water throughout Cape Cod and most parts. We've got to do the right thing for our visitors and for everybody that lives and eats and drinks here. You guys have did such a great clearing. In the past, you've sprayed 10,000 gallons already, potentially. Why can't you go back to hand pruning selectively? All the big work is done. There is no more big work to do. It's little work. It can be done by hand prune, selective, only the plants. You're gonna need to maintain no matter what, because seeds are always gonna happen. The wind is always gonna blow. You're always gonna have to maintain. Are you always gonna maintain with herbicides? We asked you to not.
We're just at about 9 minutes for you. So.
Oh, thank you. I
No,
want to
just
thank
wanted
you
to
very
make sure everyone
much
gets a chance.
for allowing this, again, for allowing the people to come up and to speak to you on behalf of protecting our own natural resources here. Again, my name is Laura Kelly. If you want to join the mission, POCCACapeCod.org. Thank you. I'm going to leave the map for anybody.
Brian OMalley, please.
Good morning. My name's Brian OMalley. I'm a resident of Provincetown. I have been a practicing primary care physician in the town of Provincetown for the Outer Cape for 40 years. Former chair of the Board of Health of Provincetown. Currently second term delegate to the Barnstable County Assembly of Delegates representing Provincetown. And I am the chair of the Natural Resources Standing Committee at the Assembly of Delegates. As a physician, I am all too familiar with the literature on the toxicities of glyphosate and other compounds that we know as sides. That suffix always means it kills things. And with the principle, first, do no harm, primum non nocere, in terms of treatments that I have applied. Don't do any harm with the treatments that you give to someone. But that's really not going to be my focus this morning. I think that the fact of toxicity of these compounds is already pretty well established. If it were not, you wouldn't exist. These regulations that are written would not exist. We wouldn't need them. These regulations are to protect the public health, to control the use of these compounds that we know to be toxic. They limit the time, the place, and the conditions for use of herbicides, which the herbicides that Eversource is proposing to use for its rights of way. They require setbacks from public and private wells and from wetlands. They consider weather conditions. These, as I say, regulations reflect our recognition that preventive health concerns should limit our human exposure to what we know to be toxins, in this case, mostly through our drinking water. What the current regulations, I think, and we think collectively fail to recognize is the issue that has just been touched on here, is that we are not protecting our groundwater itself. The sole source aquifer beneath our feet, which essentially supplies all of our water. An element, a piece of understanding that I've had since my Board of Health days, of course, is the high permeability of our Cape Cod soils. That's a reality. When it comes to septic systems, high percolation rates are favorable. You rapidly leach, and it makes it pretty easy to, everybody can get away with it. The soil location of septic systems anywhere. And has been just recently referenced by Mr. Harris, there are a few seams of clay scattered around on the Cape, but the overwhelming soil type here is sand and gravel, and very fast, very quick perk tests. Like I say, that's great for health agents and septic designers, but maybe in this case not so good. When soil's been contaminated with pesticides, with organic materials during the foliar and stump spraying of surface vegetation, these highly permeable soils allow for very rapid ground penetration. That rapid transit time and the large particle size that was referred to reduces the biodegradation of these chemicals in any organic layers of soil. Now, we know that in terms of glyphosate in particular, the biochemistry of that is that it is essentially metabolized by the microorganisms in the soil. It's not known to be broken down by, for instance, sunlight or air exposure. We don't actually know the toxicities. As much as we don't know clearly the toxicities of glyphosate, we certainly don't know the toxicities of its metabolites. That's an unknown area. But in any event, the point here is that given large particle size and very limited thickness of organic layer, there's likely to be very limited organic layer and biodegradation. With depths to water in the range typically of between 20 and 50 feet, almost all the way across the Cape, except for up in Sandwich, and significant annual rainfall, as we've seen, inches of rain at a time, these toxins are fairly likely to be entering our groundwater vertically, intact. This is the public health concern for these exposures, that pesticide regulations, and in this case herbicide regulations, are precisely intended to limit. They overlook this route into our groundwater. I believe that the unique hydrology of the Cape, its soil types, its groundwater depth and flow, and its oneness with all surface water bodies, these are all groundwater, calls for additional regulatory relief. At a minimum, soil types and percolation rates, as well as depth to groundwater, should be parameters considered in any required pesticide application, with some strict and science-based limits imposed. However, given the extent of right-of-ways across this peninsula, a far more realistic approach would be to drastically restrict or prohibit altogether the use of herbicides for their regular and ongoing maintenance. I would advocate for your denial of Eversource's current 5-year vegetation management plan, and for your requirement that an alternative plan, one based on mechanical and manual methods, be developed and submitted for approval. Thank you.
Robert Duncanson, please.
Morning, Robert Duncanson, Director of Health and Natural Resources for the town of Chatham. I'm going to read a letter for you from the Chatham Board of Selectmen. The Board of Selectmen of the town of Chatham voted unanimously on multiple occasions, the most recent being February 20th, 2018, to oppose the use of herbicides by Eversource, formerly MDAR, for vegetation management along its rights-of-way on Cape Cod. This opposition is based in many respects on the unknown impacts of herbicides on the Cape's sole source aquifer, from which its residents and visitors derive their drinking water. The public health and environmental concerns that led to previous board votes in opposition to herbicide use have not changed. In fact, the recent report from the World Health Organization raised concern with one of the compounds intended to be used as part of the herbicide program. While there is no known direct evidence of contamination of the public water supply, it is a reasonable supposition that such contamination may occur through inappropriate use. Although Eversource voluntarily entered into a moratorium on herbicide use for several years in response to concerns voiced by Cape communities, that moratorium ended. The utility actively resumed use of herbicides as part of their yearly operational plan and is proposing herbicide use as part of the 5-year vegetation management plan 2018 to 2022 currently under consideration. The proposed 2018 to 2022 VMP contains provisions for application of herbicides along with other forms of vegetation management along various rights-of-way on Cape Cod. These includes right-of-way 303, which runs from the Harwich-Chatham line through the Chatham Town Forest to Muddy Creek. Right-of-way 303 runs through DEP-approved Zone 2s for multiple public water supply wells and is within the town's Water Resource Protection Overlay District. Given the environmental sensitivity of the Cape, evidenced by its designation as a sole source aquifer, and the geologic conditions of an extremely permeable sandy soil and high groundwater, any herbicide use has the potential to impact groundwater, drinking water supplies. Although there is, as yet, no direct evidence of such contamination, waiting for such evidence will mean the groundwater supply is impacted and public health jeopardized. The lack of proactive groundwater monitoring for the materials and their surrogates/breakdown products used by Eversource increases the chances of putting Cape residents and visitors at risk. The board supports the efforts of Eversource to establish appropriate plant communities under its power lines to enhance system reliability and feels strongly that such a goal can be achieved without the use of herbicides. By discontinuing the use of herbicides on Cape Cod, Eversource could become a model for all Cape residents on the use of alternatives for vegetation management. Signed, Corey J. Metters, Chairman, Chatham Board of Selectmen. Thank you.
John Beckley, please.
Thank you very much. My name is John Beckley. I'm a resident of Chatham. I also sit on the Chatham Board of Health. I'm not speaking today on behalf of the board because we have not had an opportunity to vote, but I'm speaking as an individual. In my prior life, I was a public health director for 35 years, so I know the field of public health very well. And there's certain concepts that we follow in public health. One is prevention. The other is something called prudent avoidance. If you're not sure about the possibility of something having an adverse impact, you avoid it, if at all possible. There have been many comments made today that make good sense following the principles of prevention, and I support all those comments. Once pollution is out, you can't pull it back. If there's an inadvertent release of herbicides into the groundwater, that chemical will migrate out and you can't really easily get it back. And I understand there's a lot of arguments on the other side that are going to be more science-based, maybe a little bit less emotionally driven. And if the Massachusetts Department of Agriculture decides to allow this, I think it's critically important that you build into the permit a stringent requirement that there be groundwater monitoring in periodic places along the right-of-ways. That's based on science and chemical analyses of the water under that area that's being treated to prove it. There may be scientific theory that's driving the belief that there's not going to be any release. Prove it. Build into the permit a requirement that there be periodic groundwater monitoring stations with periodic sampling and analyses of that groundwater for any of the metabolites or breakdown product chemicals that one would expect to go down if in fact they were to go down. And give the residents of Cape Cod an assurance that if this is going to happen, that we can draw some solace and some assurance that what we fear could happen is not in fact happening. So that would be my final comment. Thank you. Thank you.
Suzanne Phillips, please.
My name is Suzanne Phillips, and I live in Orleans. I've lived on the Cape year-round for the last 48 years, and over the years I've attended different hearings, and I want to thank you folks for coming here to the Outer Cape. That doesn't happen very often. For the past 10 years, I've worked in the field of natural resources, but before that, for 35 years, in my previous profession, I worked a lot with state administrative agencies and their regulations. I helped interpret regulations, advocated for certain regulations, and even represented people in front of different hearings. I understand from that work that part of the reason for the regulations is so that state agencies don't work and act in arbitrary and capricious manners. On the other hand, I also understand that state agencies have a certain amount of discretion in the interpretation and administration of the regulations. For the record, I agree with all the people here who are opposed to this plan, and I would urge you to listen to the people. Deny the plan that has been proposed by Eversource and direct them to come up with a plan that uses alternate and safe methods to protect our drinking water. Thank you.
Nancy Orfaz, please.
Hi, my name's Nancy Ortiz, and I live in Brewster. In fact, I live on Lower Mill Pond, and I have an easement under a huge power line. A few years ago, we started the Brewster Ponds Coalition, whose purpose was to protect our ponds and our aquifer. In Brewster, we have seen our pond quality deteriorate over the last few years, so hence the creation of the Brewster Ponds Coalition. And one of our goals with the Brewster Ponds Coalition is to stop the use of herbicides, pesticides, chemical fertilizers, etc. In other words, we want people to have what's called a Cape Cod lawn. And it would be really helpful if Eversource would join us in our effort to protect our aquifer, set an example, and stop spraying. Help us save our ponds and our aquifer. Thank you for this opportunity to speak.
Paul Cass, please.
Paul Cass, Orleans. I just want to give a brief history of my involvement with chemicals. I'm no expert. I did test water for like 20 years though. But I was in the Merchant Marine for 40 odd years, and you know, we had a lot of chemicals there. You know, my ship personally brought 500 barrels of Agent Orange to Vietnam, 800,000 tons of TNT, and various chemicals aboard the ship, which God knows what they were capable of. Now, I did read safety data sheets, which they have to supply, and they essentially said, all these chemicals will kill you. You know, isn't that enough for pesticides? You know, they did have an exception. You know, it had to be over a certain temperature. But, you know, I've watched, when I first went to sea, we had a chemical called carbon tetrachloride. Very wonderful, wonderful chemical, except it was electrical cleaner. You sprayed it on, all the grit and all the carbon went, you know, rained down, and then it evaporated and you swept it up. That was outlawed, you know, because it caused cancer. Its replacement was outlawed because it caused cancer. That replacement was also outlawed because it caused cancer. Well, you know, at this point, it wasn't working anymore. It wasn't a cleaner. So we said, well, we'll use this other chemical that's ready available to us. We have Freon 12. So we use Freon 12, which, you know, it's a liquid. You spray it on, it runs down and evaporates. Well, then the Montreal Protocol came around and said that was bad for the atmosphere. So they outlawed that. So now we don't have a cleaner. But, you know, all these things remind me of, you know, talking to a tobacco farmer years and years ago about killing my poison ivy on the Cape. He said Roundup. So, you know, so I looked up Roundup. Oh, this is completely safe. Completely safe. Now, we didn't have Google as we do today, but I looked it up and it said, oh, this oxidizes, you know, in a couple of days and completely harmless. Well, it's not harmless, as we find out now. And we talk about Silent Spring, you know, DDT. My goodness. And also, I had to go to firefighting school every 5 years. And they showed us real early this film about this new chemical. So if you had, instead of putting CO2, you know, 10 tons of CO2 down the engine room to put out a fire, they had this new gas. Perfectly safe. Half the people in the test died. And then that film disappeared. And, you know, you look at the railroads. Railroads, right-of-ways. Power lines, right-of-ways. They got, most of it was free, given to them by the government, and they had thousands and thousands of miles across the United States. Well, we had a railroad line down here. Now it's a bike trail, but it became a bike trail before they found out that it's laced with chemicals. And nowadays, with responsible states, if you want to build a bike trail, now it costs $1 million a mile to clean it up. So this goes on and on and on. We have chemicals, and we don't know what happened to them. You know, I live in a place where I guess I'm lucky or not lucky, it's heavy clay. Well, all the houses that were sold there all failed the new septic system, and they had to spend another $20,000, $30,000. So that's good for the pesticides, but you know, it's bad. So anyway, what else do I have here? Well, I guess that's it. So I just hope you people be responsible. And, you know, the electric company, you know, they're a conglomerate. They're going to fight you. To save $10, they'll spend $100,000 fighting you. You know, stand up to them. You know, pesticides, God knows what's going to happen 10,000 years from now when we don't use electricity. All this land will be contaminated. So please step up to the plate. And I appreciate and thank you for showing up to listen to us.
Bruce Taub.
Hello, my name is Bruce Taub. I am in regular contact with the department, and so I'm not going to address my comments to them, even though this is a public comment meeting. I address you in two different contexts. I address you as a fellow citizen, and I address you as an attorney who's been hired by the town of Brewster to represent them in their fight against the application of pesticides along the right-of-ways in Brewster. As to the first, being a citizen, if we contextualize this, we understand that this is part of the struggle for our planet. And everybody in the audience understands it, and maybe MDAR understands it, and maybe they don't. But this is a struggle between corporate profiteers, poisoners, toxin manufacturers, and the citizens whose duty is to protect the planet, Mother Earth. Hello? Okay, this is sacred ground. The people who walked here before us treated it as sacred ground, and we treat it as sacred ground. I spent a week living in a tent at Standing Rock in 2016, and led by the Lakota people, what I understood is Miniwakoni, water is sacred. Those are my comments as a citizen. As an attorney, I urge you to understand that MDAR wants you to believe that they are a neutral. And it is my advice that you treat them as such. The enemy, if you will, is Eversource. The action is against Eversource, and we will fight Eversource with all the means available to us in any venue available to us. Toxin applications, I don't like this. Oh, Eversource is only 1%. That's like saying that guy killed one person and that one killed 100, so one person. This is poisoning our planet, and we know it, okay? The problem for us is that the burden of proof, for ridiculous reasons, has been shifted to us. It's as if MDAR says we take pretty much for granted what Eversource has put before us. Hey, look at this great science. Look at, they relied on the Environmental Protection Agency. Who are we to say that the EPA doesn't know what they're doing? Okay? There is a legal challenge that we mount. When we mount the legal challenge, Eversource is the one who fights us, not MDAR. MDAR may join in the fight, they may take a position on the fight, but we're initially challenging Eversource, and we do it in a forum controlled by MDAR. And that is where public pressure is important. Other state bodies, the State Department of Public Health, the State Department of Environmental Protection, we have to build a campaign that draws them into our circuit. And nobody deserves more credit for what they've done in this regard than Laura Kelly. So when we get into an adjudicatory hearing and we stand before a court, the court asks three things first. Do you have standing? Are you aggrieved? And show us the harm. And we have succeeded recently in showing the standing and the aggrievement. We have not satisfied the harm standard. And as an earlier speaker said, if MDAR says, hey, you're right, we're not going to spray, so Eversource will take them to court. That would be nice for us. It would be a nice delay. But when Eversource says to them, these people haven't proved anything, this is arbitrary and capricious on their part, they're going to win. So unless we can come up with evidence of harm, the bees that are dying, the bees that don't appear on your property, unless there is factual evidence of the connection between the herbicides that are sprayed there and those dead bees, it's not satisfactory. And that's a real challenge for us. That's an immense challenge for us because we don't have the testing and we don't have the data. And yet we're getting more and more creative. This thing about the 50-foot depth of the aquifer. Eversource had to prepare a unique VMP for the Cape, different than the rest of eastern Massachusetts, in response, at least in part, to concerns that were raised in the prior year's fights. Anyhow, it's a long battle. Anybody who's interested in being involved should be involved with Laura directly. Anybody who's interested in the legal challenges that are being brought. The town of Brewster has very graciously said, if we benefit and everybody else benefits, that's okay. We're not going to get stuck in this BS of how come we're paying for something that's benefiting the Cape. So Brewster also deserves big props for taking on the fight for us. Thank you. Thank you.
Christine Van Hooft, please.
My name is Christine Van Hooft from Sharon, Massachusetts. I'm a former resident of Dennisport, Massachusetts, and I fought the initial battle with Green Cape and many other warriors, as we call ourselves, for many years. I looked forward to moving to the Cape for 20 years till I finally got my little cottage in Dennisport and worked 10 years on that property in preparation for retirement. And when this came up, that we were going to lose the battle against MDAR at the time, and they were going to move ahead with their spraying. My husband attended one Cape Cod Commission meeting with MDAR and Green Cape at the time, where there were speakers on both sides, and I literally had to peel him off the ceiling for 24 hours because all he kept saying is, what is MDAR thinking? What is the Commission thinking? What's going on? And it was at that point, shortly after a few months, we made the decision that no, we can't retire here. And it breaks my heart. And there were, over the years, as I've continued to monitor what's been going on with the water on the Cape, going to Silent Spring updates, going to Green Cape meetings, being in touch with POCCA, nothing's improved. And I've asked an environmentalist, is it possible, isn't there any way, any town I can move back to the Cape? Can you recommend a place for me? And because they care for me, they said no. And that's really sad. And I attended many of the town meetings in the initial process. We were successful in at least getting a moratorium against MDAR going ahead with their herbicide spraying for twice. And at a minimum, I implore MDAR to once again say, hold the phone, let's have a moratorium for the next year or 2 years till more research can be done. All of the towns have said, no, we don't want this. The residents, environmental organizations said, no, don't do it. For decades before this, there was never any herbicide, well, there was some testing done, because I have proof of that, from a resident in Brewster that approached me after the Brewster town meeting, and I spoke there, and she wanted me to help her because she had written to everybody else as an abutter after MDAR had sprayed and wasn't getting any answers. And she presented me with photos and said, anything you can do to help me. And this was her property before MDAR sprayed. And this is the dead vegetation years later of her property. Dead vegetation closer than 10 feet of standing water. The wetland flows into Ed Snow Pond. I've listened, to them now requiring that, they want more testimony from the Board of Health. The Board of Health has already testified initially and repeatedly. They don't want this. They don't think it's safe. And it's proving out to me that this is not a sustainable means of managing the vegetation under the power lines, because initially when I was fighting this battle, there were 5 herbicides. Now, I was shocked when I went to the meeting in Sandwich to speak, that now there are 9 herbicides. We know that glyphosate kills off soil biodiversity. There are scientists, Dr. Maywan Ho and Dr. Eva Sirinathsinghi, published a book that glyphosate accumulates in the plant's tissue, moves into its roots, and is released into the soil. It increases the virulence of soil-borne disease organisms, and it's toxic to normal biological control and other beneficial organisms in the soil. So not only are they running the risk of contaminating the water supply, at a minimum, they're killing our soil diversity in the process. And when I was at a Cape Cod Commission meeting, and they talk about the restrictions between spraying between open water and drift, I mean, just look at this map. Look at all the open water, and look at where their power lines are. Do you really need a rocket scientist to explain this? It's baffling to me. And in Cape Cod Commission's own little handout that they went when I went there one day for a meeting, give me a moment. Oh, I lost it. Oh, here it is. Only rain down the drain protect Cape Cod water. When it rains, it drains. Use fertilizers sparingly and avoid pesticides. What's it going to take, people? Now, in addition to the 9 herbicides that they're going to spray, I guess because we brought up the argument of drift conditions, they decided, oh, well, we can solve that problem. We'll add more chemicals that are drift retardants to avoid the possibility of drift. And at the time, when I did the research, Accord, winds in excess of 5 miles per hour, not supposed to spray. Arsenal, 3 to 10 miles per hour. Escort, 3 to 10 miles per hour. Pyridine, 2 to 10 miles an hour. Quinine, with wind speeds of less than 5 miles per hour. And we aren't even informed of what those chemical cocktails, what those mixtures are going to be, and what those wind conditions are. The fact, MDAR, I agree, is a neutral party, and I believe in that because they were gracious enough to institute moratoriums before, and I'm strongly urging for that now for the residents and citizens of Cape Cod. One of your mandates is to protect the public drinking water supply. And in most areas, in most circumstances, it is beneficial to exercise the precautionary principle. Eversource has failed to do that. Why all of a sudden, who decided that this shift is that we have to provide the proof and they can go ahead and take the risk at the peril to Cape Cod residents? It doesn't make common sense. And lastly, and just so folks know, for anybody, that according to Green Cape, in a report given to MDAR before in 2010, groundwater typically travels at 1 foot per day on Cape Cod. So these chemicals could easily contaminate groundwater supplies in nearby private drinking wells. And according to Erin Bowles from the Mass Breast Cancer Coalition and Cheryl Osimo from the Massachusetts Breast Cancer Coalition previously stated, these herbicides contain chemicals called endocrine disrupting chemicals that may be linked to breast cancer and other illnesses. Research tells us that exposure to even very small amounts of certain endocrine disruptors can lead to serious, very serious health impacts. Sadly, the ingredients in the approved herbicides have not been tested to be free of ingredients linked to breast cancer, and we know that Cape Cod has some of the highest breast cancer rates on the Cape. And I leave with that, and I pray that MDAR does the right thing. You've done the right thing in the past in asking for at least a moratorium for a year to give folks time to get public information out there. And I implore you, though, to reject the VMP using herbicides from Eversource. Thank you.
Karen Ryder, please.
So we are almost at 12:30, but we will continue so that everyone has an opportunity to speak.
Hi, my name is Karen Ryder. I am a year-round Chatham resident. I have the misfortune to live near a right-of-way. I would like to say that I am 100% opposed to any spraying of herbicides on the rights of way. There's been plenty of science presented here. I don't think I need to present it again, but the fact is your Eversource is spraying not only one substance, one herbicide, but it's a combination of herbicides. And I even have some specifics here of one of the combinations that they sprayed near my house. So there is no data to prove that it's safe. And with the rate of filtering into our groundwater, it's probably pretty safe to assume that it's coming into our drinking water, sole source aquifer. You've heard this from other people. There is no data that says that it's safe. There's no data that says these combinations are safe. I doubt that they are. I mean, you can barely even pronounce metasulfuron methyl, ammonium salt of furosemide, and imazapyr, I don't even know how to pronounce it. This was a combination that was used in the right-of-way near my house. The applicators, who I believe were not licensed, and they're supposed to be licensed according to the VMP, were spraying with winds that were 20 miles an hour. I actually brought this to the attention of MDAR and received a letter back concerning my alleged possible violations is how they put it. And I'm not exactly clear why, but they found that there was no fault on the part of Eversource. Basically, it said in two of the violations, they're saying it's not a state mandated regulation. So even though Eversource did not follow their own policies, they couldn't do anything about it. So I would say that if you can't do anything about the fact that Eversource is not following their own policies, then why are you approving the VMP, where they said that they will follow these policies and did not? So I'll be specific. Eversource notifies the abutters, houses and businesses that abut the rights of way. Okay, it said specifically in the 2013 to 2017 VMP that anybody that is within sight of the right of way is supposed to have a door hanger or some kind of clear notification at their house. I think they put them in mailboxes that they're going to come spray. I can look out any of my front windows and look at the right of way. I never received that information. And when I said that this was a violation and MDAR came and looked at it, they're saying it's not a state, it's just a policy, not state mandated regulation. Direct abutters were notified by door hangers. I am a direct abutter. According to the VMP, I read through that thing, and I didn't get a notification. The second one, use inconsistent with product labeling occurred. Wind speeds were higher than label recommendations. They were. But again, the language within these labels states applications to be made within the best judgment of the applicator. It's advisory language and not enforceable language. This is the letter from MDAR saying that they couldn't do anything about the fact that these applicators who I believe were unlicensed. That was something that I brought up in my complaint, but was not addressed in this letter back to me. It's advisory language. So even though winds were 20 miles per hour, and anybody can look up the records for that day, for that location, it's in Chatham, right near Muddy Creek, they can't do anything about it. So I wanted to bring this up because not everybody has had this experience. I have had this personal experience of regulations not being followed. So please do not approve this if you're not going to enforce these regulations. They're not even following the regulations. We had 2 guys out there with backpack sprayers. They don't have any protection. They don't have the hazmat type stuff on. I feel bad for those guys. You know they're going to get cancer. They're spraying these 3 chemicals in the right away here. They've got maybe gloves on. They don't have face masks. They don't have head coverings. They're getting it on their clothes. The winds are gusting 20 miles an hour. And there's no enforcement. So for all these reasons, I would say, this has no place on the Cape in sandy soils without enforcement of regulations. And when there are alternative means, my friend lives in Chatham, she has goats. I'm sure if I said, hey, Jen, can I bring my goats, your goats over there and do some trimming under the lines? I'm sure she'd say, yeah, great. I don't want that in my water either. What's going to happen is probably and yes, the clear cutting was done several years ago. There's not much growing there. We're talking, little pines and oaks about this tall. It takes a little pair of clippers just to go clip them all down. And you do that once a year or 2 years. I do it in my yard. It doesn't take much. They're saving $1 by spraying chemicals. That's.
When you saw them spray, when you saw applicators spray
Yes.
the day, were they going from plant to plant and spraying just that thing like MDAR in the past has said that their trained applicators would do, or were they spraying?
They were spraying low, I will say that, but they weren't. I did not see that they were spraying individual items.
They were broadcast spraying?
They were spraying like this.
Okay.
So,
thank you.
and I have some pictures. I believe I have a short video, but I think they might have stopped at that point when I started doing a video, because I immediately said, what are you doing? The winds are 20 miles an hour. You shouldn't be spraying when the winds are this high. And they kind of looked at me and said, huh? Not only that, it was raining. Okay? They stopped when it started raining hard, but it was already raining. It was that misty, fine rain that we get here. You guys all know about it. It was raining. So they're spraying in an area here, so it just makes it go down to our groundwater that much more quickly. And right down the hill is a vernal pool, and the other way is Muddy Creek. This says I live on right-of-way 319. I don't know, I thought Mr. Duncanson referred to 303. I thought that was the one I lived on, but I'm not sure. I'm sure MDAR knows which one it is. It's 319. Muddy Creek on one side, vernal pool right down the hill. That's a recipe for disaster, not only for our drinking water, but for any wildlife, for anything that's there. So if anybody wants more information about this letter and exactly what happened in this situation, I'd be happy to share it with you. And thank you for coming and taking the tests and doing all the work that you did. However, I hope you've listened to what I said about if you can't enforce the regulations, please don't allow them. And in addition, there's no process for appeal. There's nothing here. I didn't even know how long it would be before I got an answer. It took 3 months. So if we can't regulate it, don't allow it. Thank you. Karen Ryder.
Donna Wright, please.
Good afternoon. My name is Donna Wright. I'm an old Cape Codder from many, many generations. My great-grandmother, Hattie Blossom Fritz, used to write an article for the Boston Globe under the pen name The Woodsy One. And she would talk about the culinary and medicinal herbs that grew wild on Cape Cod, something that's near and dear to my heart, a tradition and a teaching that I wish, that I hope that I can pass on to my children and my grandchildren. It's part of my heritage. It's part of our history. I currently work at an old school herbal apothecary called Great Cape Herbs in Brewster, Massachusetts. I work for a gentleman named Stephen Brown, who couldn't be here today because he's overseas. He gave me permission to read a letter that he submitted already. Greetings from Brewster. I wish to comment upon the Eversource VMP 2018 plan for Cape Cod and especially Brewster. We have just seen yet another mass murder of school children by a shooter who, like a preponderance of other shooters, had been given prescription and antipsychotic drugs to take. It has been clearly shown in several scientific studies that antidepressive drugs like Prozac cause angry and suicidal thoughts in some of those who take these drugs, and he quotes from an article that he cites. I am a 30-year medical herbalist in Brewster, and part of my practice is to help people who are psychologically in a state of disease to try and regain their balance. Part of my suggestions for clients, because we herbalists do not diagnose, prescribe, or give medical advice, is to gather wild-growing St. John's wort flowers and buds and make a tea or tincture to be taken as one step in helping their condition. St. John's wort grows naturally in sunny, sandy loam, and especially where the soil has been disturbed, as after a road has been put in, a foundation dug, or land plowed. Power line rights of way are perfect habitat for this useful and medicinally valuable plant. Applications of herbicides to these plants will cause them to become neurotoxins, thereby leading to a myriad of diseases, cancer, Parkinson's, dysbiosis, etc., but especially diseases of the nervous system. Eversource has been spraying these neurotoxins, and yes, that means poisons to the nervous system, on St. John's wort and other valuable medicinal plants, yarrow, plantain, elderberry, etc. For years, they have been spraying these poisons upon the land of others over which they have a right of way. Thus, with the landowner's permission, any person in need of these botanical medicines can harvest them along these rights of way. If the plants are covered with poison, then the public who harvest these plants are being poisoned by Eversource. Basically, Eversource is poisoning our medicine, causing damage to people's nervous systems and contributing to the heinous mass murders that we are seeing across this country. Thus, I do ask the regulatory bodies of Commonwealth of Massachusetts, where my family has lived since 1630, to prohibit the use of herbicides upon any rights of way over which it has regulatory authority throughout Massachusetts. With great sincerity, Stephen B. Brown. As an old Cape Codder, many generations, and with this tradition of living off the land as fishermen, as gardeners, as hunters, this is our children's inheritance. Please, no more herbicides. Thank you.
Did everybody that showed up today get a chance to speak? If not, if you could just come sign in, then we'll let you. Thank you. No problem.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you for coming down. My name is Judith Underwood. I'm a resident of Harwich. I'm the president of the Blue Institute at Cape Cod, and very recently I've been appointed to be the interim water commissioner in Harwich, and I'm not here as an official of that because it's very new, just a couple weeks. But I am here as the founder and president of the Blue Institute at Cape Cod. We are a global hub for clean water education, research, and innovation. We have about 70 universities across the US and Canada that are going to be sending students here. And we've got about 1,500 graduate students from around the world that are going to be coming here and doing externships. Clean water is very near and dear to my heart. I've worked for a number of years in technology transfer. I've taught at the college level and the K through 12 level. In earlier years, pre-children, I did technology transfer work at the United Nations and the Third World Academy of Sciences in Trieste, Italy. And I'm an early adopter of solar technology on brownfields, so I'm very familiar with brownfields. I'm really disturbed that I have to be here today to speak about this because I really thought that the state had heard what Cape Codders had to say at all levels, from our scientists, from our politicians, and especially from our residents. This is not new. But it is something that I teach in my classes when we talk about the cautionary principle. And in this case, it's very hard for me to explain to students why the onus is on the citizens to prove to you as the independent body why these chemicals that Eversource is using are potentially going to hurt us. I think it really should be the other way around. They're not disclosing what they are, and in the public policy realm, and as somebody that's representing people that are drinking our water every day, this poses a huge problem of perception. And for scientists understand what perception means when they're trying to convince the general public of something. But here, you're asking the general public to convince Eversource that this is not an issue. And on the contrary, for me, this is really an economics issue. Eversource is a public utility, and very often that word public gets taken out of the equation, and it needs to come back into the equation. Yes, Eversource does have stockholders. We understand that, and they have to pay their stockholders dividends, but at what cost? You know, once we lose our single source aquifer, there's no going back. And one of the reasons why we've located the Blue Institute here on Cape Cod is because of that unique aquifer. It's very rare throughout the entire globe to have a place like Cape Cod with that single source aquifer. We have fresh water and we have marine water so close. And for the last 6 years now, I've been serving on the Cape Cod Regional Wastewater Task Force, where we've been, it's made up of stakeholders, and it's through the Cape Cod Chamber of Commerce, and it's scientists, it's elected officials, it's business people, it's the whole gamut, and educators, and I've learned more about nutrient pollution, right? And so when I teach to students about the Clean Water Act, one of the issues with the Clean Water Act is single source pollution, right? And one of the issues here on Cape Cod, when we look at nitrogen pollution, is you can't go back and point out to which household exactly is putting that pollutant in the water. You can do that when you're dealing with rivers and you're dealing with pipes coming out of factories, right? You can do that in an urban setting. You can't do that in a rural setting. Unless you're going to have channels and channels and channels of wells in the ground for testing, how are you going to control what Eversource is doing? From a scientific perspective, it's a very difficult task. And so that's why I think that onus on what those chemicals could do really needs to first be proven by Eversource that they're safe. And they haven't done that as far as I've seen. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong. But from a scientific perspective, it's lacking. It's weak. It gives bad perception. And in an era where our water infrastructure is old and needs to be fixed as it is, this is just adding on to our water pollution problems. So, thank you very much.